Hey everyone, Nathan here, Absurd Being, Totality and Infinity. In this video we're going to look at sections 2 and we'll start with section 3. So we're going to finish up section 2 with the E part and we'll start, we'll cover also section 3, the A part, just because they're both pretty small, so that we can cover both in a single video. In section 2E, the last part of section 2, the world of phenomena and expression, is basically revision. It's stuff that we've talked about before, so we can race through that quite quickly and then get into section 3. But anyway, let's start with the first part of today's video, which will be works. So we've talked about works before, and that's kind of what Levinas is going to talk about again. He's going to just cover the same material. It's fine, you know. I'm happy to review stuff when I'm reading these books. It's always good to go over this again and again and hear it said in different words, just to let that meaning really sink in. So I'm not too worried about it. I'll try and talk about things a little bit different than we've things that add to what we've already covered, but this is what he has to say about works anyway. Separated interiority is economic existence. We've talked about that, but he asks, isn't this interiority manifested on the outside through works? So isn't this interior that I am, the separated being, isn't it shown, isn't it projected out through works, through actions, behaviors, manners, things that I do, works of art, things that I produce? Isn't who I am in all of these things? And the answer is no. And the reason, and we've talked about this before, is that works must be interpreted by the other. So when you see a painting painted by someone, you don't get the person themselves. You get something that you have to add your own interpretation to. Even things like philosophical texts, even a book, you're still interpreting. It's the other. Sorry, well, not I'm the other in that case, but the person who wrote the book is not there with you. They're not directly there. You're getting access to them through this medium. Yes, they wrote it. And yes, it can be quite clear, but still you are interpreting without their assistance. There's still a vicariousness to this relationship. So he talks about questioning here. And there are two ways we can question. The first, we can question by asking what. We usually question things by asking what. But when we question a person, when we interrogate a person, ask about a person, we're often also asking for a what. So when we say, even though we use the word who, so if I say, who is Mr. Jones? The answer that I'm usually expecting is the answer that will tell me who he is as this kind of, in this mode of economic existence. Who is he? What's his job? Where's he from? What language does he speak? All of these kinds of the facts that are related to his life, his existence as this separated interiority. So as a node in a system of references. I'm trying to get his I'm trying to see where he fits in this greater referential totality. But that's getting only Mr. Jones as a separated interiority. I'm not really piercing through to Mr. Jones himself. And so when we question a person as a who, we're looking for something different. To the question who answers the non-qualifiable presence of an existent who presents himself without reference to anything, and yet distinguishes himself from every other existent. The question who envisages a face. And so that's just that idea. The idea of the face comes back, which has significance for Levinas. It's kind of taking us directly to that person, the person themselves, without reference to other things, the person who is that transcendent, absolute alterity. So the who of someone can't be grasped in works because they're not expressed in the works. They don't express themselves directly in the works. Instead, in the works, whatever the actions, the behaviors, the products, they are signified in them by a sign in a system of signs. Quite like that expression. The other person in works is signified in them by a sign in a system of signs. So it's all this, that this is economic existence. This is that separated interiority. It's that node in a reference, in a referential totality. You're connected to all these other points, which means you are part of a totality. So we're not getting at the person, you, as a separate alterity, as an absolute alterity, as that infinite presence that you really are. So what we're getting is a manifestation in the absence of being, a phenomenon. And that's going to take us into the next part of this first half, which is phenomenon and being. And here, Levinas talks about phenomenon, the difference between phenomenon and being. And so phenomenon is, as I just said in the closing of the last part, a manifestation in the absence of being, and it's manifested in works. So phenomenon is kind of an image, if you like. It's me signified as part of a totality. It's a signification. It's a sign of me in a system of signs, in a totality of signs. It's not the genuine me. It's not the real me. So that's what the phenomenon is. And he says existence as interiority is phenomenal. So the phenomenon for Levinas is kind of this superficial aspect, superficial dimension to me. It's not the real me as the absolute alterity that I truly am. And connected with this is, and this distinction between phenomenon and being, which is being is the real me, the truth, if you like. Connected with that distinction is a distinction he draws in teaching, modes of teaching as well. So he contrasts the Socratic with the Cartesian order. And the Socratic method of teaching is that method in which we are trying to implant knowledge in the listener. And so this way of teaching already then presupposes beings who have chosen discourse. So we've already got the kind of an individual who has elected to engage in this discourse, in this teaching of discourse, this teaching method of discourse. But what the Cartesian method does, on the other hand, it's a revelation in which teaching doesn't implant knowledge in the listener. Teaching implants the idea of infinity in the listener. And we've talked about this before as well, that the first teaching, I think we called it, is the infinite other, the alterity of the other, the absolute alterity of the other. And that's what Cartesian teaching is. It's not imparting any knowledge to the listener. It's just the revelation of an absolute alterity. It's a revelation of that infinite, that is the transcendental other, the transcendent other. And you can see how that kind of works. The Socratic method of teaching, that's made famous by Plato, where you question the other in order to kind of elicit from them the knowledge that you're trying to teach them. But it's all centered around knowledge. But it already presupposes the other. It already presupposes a being, to an individual, to engage in this discourse. Whereas Descartes, and this is a reference to I think therefore I am, that cogito, which is the first step, the first thing that we know, and it's not a form of knowledge. It's more like a revelation. I am. I don't learn that I exist. It's something that I don't reason my way to my existence. That's the whole point of the cogito. I think therefore I am. It's not actually a logical deduction, because if it were, it would be something that he could be deceived about, right? If he required the rules, the laws of logic, in order for this proof to be a proof, to be valid, then he could be being deceived by the malignant demon, which he postulates. So I think therefore I am. It's not actually a deductive proof, and that's something that I think a lot of people don't recognize in Descartes. It's a first person experience. It's a first person experience, not a third person fact, not a third person deduction or observation. It's not that you notice yourself, you notice thoughts, and then deduce, well, if there are thoughts, there must be a thinker, and therefore, since I'm having the thoughts, it must be me. That a whole chain of reasoning like that is not at all what Descartes had in mind. He had in mind this direct first person experience. I think, therefore I am. There are no premises here. There is no syllogism. There's no conclusion. It's just evident in itself, and it's evident only for you because it's a first person experiential truth. It's not a logical deduction, and that's how anyway that's why Levinas is connecting this to Descartes, calling it the Cartesian order of teaching. And it's prior to the Socratic one, because the Cartesian teaching is that first revelation of the other, of the infinite, which is the other, that absolute alterity, which I can never grasp, which I can never totalize, bring into a totality. So anyway, those are the two different methods of teaching. And that the second, teaching as that revelation of discourse, lifts us out of the realm of the economic and into the realm of the ethical. So bringing us face to face with the other. And that is doing the same thing as taking us from the phenomenon to being. It's the same idea there. And that is where we are going to be moving to in the second half of the video today, with section 3, exteriority in the face, and the first part, A, sensibility in the face. Okay, so in this first section, we're just going to cover one main point here, and it's related to, it's all about sensibility. So sensation, there are two ways that Levinas looks at sensation here. Sensation through intentionality and sensation as enjoyment. And so that sensation through intentionality reduces the thing to a subjective state, reduces whatever it is, the sensible, reduces the sensible to a state in my mind, because I'm connecting it with intentionality. So when we frame sensation in terms of intentionality, that's what we're doing. We're reducing it to a subjective state that essentially ignores the thing itself. We're putting everything on the subject side of the equation. And in this, when we do this, sensation is then an abstraction. We can't grasp the whole of sensation if we're locked on to the subject side of the equation. So that's the first thing that he says, that's a kind of it's a red herring. It's not quite the right word. It's kind of a dead end, that path to understanding sensation. So intentionality is not going to be the way to go. And intentionality obviously is connected with phenomenology, with Husserl. So that's kind of a critique of that direction, I think. The other way to approach sensation is through enjoyment, which is that kind of original mode of human existence that Levinas talks about a lot, living from. That's how he describes it. So this sensation, understood as enjoyment, is anterior to the crystallization of consciousness. It's anterior to that distinction between I and not I. So we're going back to a point which precedes that distinction of subject-object. And that's the mode of enjoyment. The mode of enjoyment is lived directly, immanently. It doesn't have there's no reflection, there's no, we haven't devolved into economic existence at this point. It's just, there is no separate sense of an I versus something which is not I. So this is going to be a more original, at least, probably, I don't know if authentic's the right word, but certainly a more original way of understanding sensation. And he talks about an interesting feature here, which is what he calls the transcendental function of sensation. And this is basically transcendental. It's the way that we move outside of ourselves. It's the way that we get access to something which is not me, not contained within my sphere. Something, and in this case, we're talking about the world, getting access to the world, which is an other, but it's an other that we totalize through economic existence, through labor and that kind of thing. But anyway, the transcendental function of sensation is accomplished through just two qualities, the visual and tactile qualities of objects. So all other qualities, all other ways of sensing objects come from economic existence. And so what we're trying to do here is get to something prior to economic existence, get to something that's more originary, that will show us how it is we have access to the sensible realm, to objects of sense originally, before this mode of labor and economic existence. In other words, how objects first appear as objects in that mode of enjoyment. They don't appear as objects situated in a referential totality, or as a project which I can aim towards, or as a means to an end, because none of those things exist in the mode of enjoyment, in that mode of living from. So what Levinas is trying to understand here is how objects appear as objects in the first place. And that means understanding how they appear as objects in the mode of enjoyment. And that's what the transcendental function of sensation is all about. So it's accomplished through visual and tactile qualities. If we take vision first, Levinas says that vision presupposes light. The eye does not see the light, but the object in the light. Vision is therefore a relation with a something established within a relation with what is not a something. We are in the light inasmuch as we encounter the thing in nothingness. So that's an interesting take on this. So we see the object, we grasp the object through vision, but what allows the object to appear as an object is this something, which is not a something, which is not an object, light. So light is this non-object, non-thing, no thing, which reveals objects for us. Interesting. And the second transcendental function then is touch. And this also presupposes for Levinas the nothing of space. Space again is this, we move through space in order to grasp things, in order to touch them, in order to access their tactile qualities. We have to navigate this thing which is not an object for us. We don't see space. It's what allows the object to become a tactile object for us, something that we can touch, grasp. So again, this idea of nothingness is apparent here. And this is reminiscent of, all of these guys were talking about nothingness since Heidegger, right, who started it all. But it's a different take on Heidegger's view of nothingness, and how the nothing reveals objects in the first place, and that the way that the thing is dependent on nothing. And it's the same idea here, but kind of in a different way. The nothing of light and the nothing of space are what allow objects to appear as objects in the first place. So objects first appear as objects through the void of light and space, i.e. out of nothingness. He calls it a void of openness, which again is very reminiscent of Heidegger, who talked about the open clearing and all of that kind of stuff. I think post being in time, but yeah, that's very reminiscent of Heidegger there. This nothingness then for Levinas, on the other hand, is actually the there is. We've talked about that before, that kind of pure existence with no actual existing things. So the there is this nothingness which reveals objects for us, which allows objects to appear as objects. So the there is, as this void of openness, appears in the negation of every qualifiable thing, and it also appears, we've seen it appear in the elemental, which again is very similar notion here, that by which or on which qualities rest. But it's something which we saw a few videos back, we couldn't see, we couldn't detect, we couldn't know. It was an unknown source of the qualities of our existing in the world. It was an unknown support for that. And that again is just tying back into this idea of nothingness preceding and making possible the thing. So what we have then is, at the end, when all's said and done, we've got this notion of sensibility, particularly at this transcendental function of sensation, which makes possible enjoyment, because it makes the thing appear, it makes objects appear as objects. Makes is probably not the right word. It allows objects to appear as objects in the first place. And since it makes enjoyment possible, sensibility, it also makes labor and economic existence possible later as well. It's the support for all of the other qualities that we're able to detect, that we're able to attribute to objects. So sensibility, in the fact that it makes enjoyment possible, it makes possible an objectivity which is nevertheless still for me. It's still centered around me, even though I'm not explicitly aware of myself as a separate I in the mode of enjoyment. Everything is still, the sensible is still referring to me. It still gets its value from me in the sense that I take enjoyment from it. I live from all of these things. So it's still, there's still a referential center, if you like, in me, even though I'm not explicitly, I haven't thematized myself as a separate I. So Levinas calls this kind of sensibility, this kind of seeing, he calls it on the horizon, as opposed to approaching the things, the objects, sensing the things face to face. And that's the distinction that we're going to look at in the next video, because for that latter, for that face-to-face direct apprehension, that direct kind of sensibility, sensation, we're going to need the revelation of the other. So at this point, we haven't yet broached the other themselves. We haven't started into the face-to-face relation properly yet. We've just looked at sensibility as it is originally in this mode of enjoyment and traced it back to the transcendental function of vision and touch, which we saw rested on this nothingness, the nothingness of light and the nothingness of space. Okay, nice. Let's check a summary. So first we looked at the phenomenon, and we saw that this was manifested in works, manifested in behaviors, actions, things that we produce. And this is all about interiority. It's all about economic existence. The individual is signified by a sign in a system of signs. That's all the phenomenon gets us. Gets us this kind of superficial understanding. as opposed to being, which is manifested in teaching through discourse. And it's manifested directly. It's that immediate revelation. So we looked at the distinction between Socratic versus Cartesian order of teaching. The former imparts knowledge. The second implants the idea of infinity, the idea of the transcendental other. Transcendental? Is it the transcendent other, maybe? And then we looked at sensibility in the second half. And there are basically two ways of approaching sensibility, through intentionality or through enjoyment. Intentionality left us in this kind of subjective state. It gave us just an abstraction of sensation. To understand sensation fully, we had to look at enjoyment. So this takes us prior to that crystallization of consciousness, prior to that separation of the world into subject and object. And in enjoyment, we discovered a transcendental function of sensation. And it was manifested in light and space. And these both relate to vision and touch, respectively. And the key here was that light and space are non-objects. They are the nothings on which objects first appear as objects for us in this original mode of enjoyment. And the way that the Levinas called this capacity of light and space to allow objects to appear like this, he called it the void of openness. And this was just the there is that has cropped up before for us in the elemental, and it's the necessary prerequisite for anything to appear in the first place. Okay, and that is basically where I'm going to wrap us up today. This is kind of really an introductory kind of video. I feel it's like we're teeing up for the meat of section 3, which will take us into that face-to-face relation in more detail, which is really the core of Levinas's philosophy, I think. Anyway, let me call it there. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.